enormous, like enormous caverns with giant columns. It's all carved out of the stone. They moved millions of tons of rocks out of there. No record. No one knows where the stone went.
In June of 1992, 4 farmers in eastern China started draining a pond their village had always called bottomless. They only wanted better ground to raise fish. So they ran the pumps, watched the water sink lower, and waited for the muddy floor to appear. It never did. The bottom simply wasn't there.
So the guide was like, so now there's a tunnel in here to like the main temple. It's about 1.5 miles away, and there's a tunnel where you can go through it. It takes a couple hours to walk.
What lay under that pond would pull in scientists from 5 countries, armed with lasers and machines those farmers could never have dreamed of. And what those tools handed back was so far beyond anything anyone expected that the only honest word left for it was stunning. The ponds that were never bottomless. The village is called Xi'an, tucked into Longyou County in Zhejiang Province, on the eastern side of China. At the foot of a low hill sat a cluster of small, still ponds, and for as far back as anyone's grandparents could remember, the story was always the same. Those ponds had no bottom. Nobody swam them, nobody drained them. You left them alone. Until, on the 9th of June, these 4 didn't. Hour after hour, the pumps kept pulling, and the water kept dropping past every depth a normal pond should have had. And somewhere down in the murk, a shape started to resolve. Not mud, not bedrock, a straight edge, then a corner, then the unmistakable line of something cut by hand, sloping down into the dark below the old water line.
No records, no history, no nothing about why this was created, who it was created for.
They had not found the bottom of a pond. They had found the flooded mouth of an enormous room carved out of solid rock that had been sitting underwater for something like 2,000 years. And here's the part I can't get past. That was only the first room. 24 rooms carved from the dark. Once word got out and the surveying started, the single chamber became 5. Then the crews found 19 more threaded through the same hill. 24 artificial caverns in all, sitting in one tight cluster, together hollowing out more than 30,000 square meters of space that somebody, an unimaginably long time ago, had cut by hand from the rock. And these are not crawl spaces. The biggest chambers stretch somewhere between 18 and 34 meters across, with ceilings climbing as high as a 6 or 7-story building over your head. Down in each one stand massive carved pillars holding the roof up, walls raked at careful slopes, broad staircases spilling down from a single opening at the surface. Every cavern is its own sealed pocket of darkness, reached by one shaft and one carved stairway.
Like this one right here, it's a dragon, and its head is going down into the ground. So it's entirely possible that we are still standing on further unexcavated parts of this cave.
Only one of the 24 has ever been open to visitors, and on its walls survive 3 carved figures: a horse, a fish, and a bird. A rare flicker of decoration in a place that is otherwise all raw, deliberate scale. Sit with that for a second. 24 of these, cut by hand. And here's what makes it stranger than the sheer size. The layouts repeat. Cave to cave, the proportions echo each other. The pillars land where you would expect them. The work is far too even to be a string of happy accidents. Somebody planned all of this, and then somebody made very sure no one would ever read a single word about it. The new way in pumping out the water was the easy part. Studying caves like these, fragile and lightless and 2,000 years old, without wrecking them, is a problem all its own. So, over the last 3 decades, the people who came to study them reached for tools the original diggers could never have dreamed of. They walked in 3D laser scanners and captured every wall and pillar down to the millimeter. They built digital models of the chambers and geological models of the entire hill the caves had been carved into. They ran structural tests and rock mechanics simulations, the kind of analysis you would point at a modern bridge. And they came from everywhere, specialists out of China, Japan, Poland, Singapore, and the United States, all circling the same impossible question. This was the Longyou caves explored like they had never been explored before, measured, modeled, read like a sealed document somebody was finally prying open. Here's the thing though, the more precisely they measured, the less the numbers behaved. Because what the scans handed back was not reassurance, it was a puzzle. What the scans revealed. Start with the part that quietly rattles the engineers. There is a moment that has to keep happening in this work, where somebody feeds the shape of one of these chambers into a structural model, a chamber where the rock wall has thinned in places to roughly half a meter, and then waits for the software to show them how it failed. By every ordinary expectation, a span that wide sitting over walls that thin, after 2,000 years of floods and tremors and shifting ground, should have come down a long time ago. It didn't. No collapse, no rubble on the floor, no sag in the ceiling. That is the kind of result that makes a structural engineer sit back and look twice, the math insisting this should not still be standing, and the cave calmly proving that it is. So, how does that happen? Run the rock and the layout together, and the same answer keeps surfacing. Whoever cut these understood their material. They knew how strong the stone was. They knew how to spread the weight of a ceiling across the pillars. They knew which way to slope a wall so it carried its own load instead of fighting it.
Maybe they used it for what some of these are being used for today. They filled it with water and put giant fish in here and used it as breeding areas. Who knows?
They picked the spots in the hill where the rock would hold for the long haul, and it has held for 20 centuries, which is a bet most modern builders would think twice before making. It helped that the hill is a soft, fine-grained rock, soft enough to work with hand tools, firm enough to keep a roof up once it is shaped. And the walls themselves quietly explain the method. The marks run top to bottom, layer by layer, exactly the way you would carve if you started at the ceiling and worked your way down as the floor dropped out beneath you. We are not even guessing about the tools. Short chisels have been pulled out of one of the larger caves, the actual implements that bit into that stone. And the marks are everywhere, fine parallel lines, cut at the same patient angle, wrapping the walls and ceilings and pillars in one repeating texture across all 24 caves. They are not decoration. They are a logbook, proof of a method so consistent it had to be standardized, carried out by teams who all work the same way. But here's the detail I genuinely can't shake. Some of the deepest stretches never saw a scrap of daylight, not even back when the cave stood open, pitch black. And the chisel lines down there are just as straight, just as evenly spaced, as the ones right by the entrance. Whoever was working in that dark held the exact same standard with nothing at all to see by. The scans turned up one more thing the builders thought of that almost nobody notices: water. Each cave has drainage carved right into it, grooves and channels and little collection points that would have caught rainwater coming down the entrance shaft and walked it along a controlled path, instead of letting it pool across the floor and quietly rot the place from the inside out. That is not luck, and it is not an afterthought. That is plumbing, designed on purpose, sketched out 2,000 years ago by people who had clearly thought about the centuries to come. And listen, if your jaw is somewhere near the floor right now, do me a quick favor and hit subscribe before we keep going, because everything up to this point is the part science can actually explain. What comes next is the part it can't. How old is any of this? So how old is this really? Dating an empty space is brutal. You can date what's inside and the dirt that drifted in over centuries, but the hollow carries no year. What investigators have is the pottery and the floor sediment, tracing to the Western Han period, roughly 206 BC to 23 AD. But that sediment settled in after the caves already existed, so the carving came first. The honest line, at least 2,000 years old, possibly older, exact date still a blank. What it is not. But first, some junk to clear away, because this site collects stories that collapse the second you check them. You'll see headlines swearing scientists solved the mystery. They did not. They have answered plenty about how the caves were built and why they still stand, but not who ordered them or what for. You'll see it claimed a lost civilization carved them, or aliens. No archaeological evidence supports any of that. None. Every artifact from the site points at ancient Chinese builders, old but entirely ours. You'll hear that nobody knows how they were made. Misleading. Between the tool marks, the geology, and the engineering, the how is on solid ground. Ordinary people with simple tools who knew exactly what they were doing. And you'll trip over breathless posts about scans uncovering secret chambers or a hidden city below. There is no verified evidence of any of it, just people chasing views. Strip it all away though, and you do not get a smaller mystery. You get a sharper one. The silence. Nobody can explain. Here is what survives once the nonsense is gone, and it is heavier than any of it. A project this size demanded a staggering amount of everything. Estimates put the rock removed near 1 million cubic meters, and by some reckonings, 1,000 people working for years. That is no weekend job. That is an operation. Planning, supervision, food, tools, organized labor. And there is not one record of it, anywhere. No text from the time describes the digging. No inscription names who paid for it or who swung the chisels. No document says what it was for. The earliest written mention anyone has ever found is a poem from the 17th century, far too late to know a single real thing. And then there is the rock. Sit with this for a second. Nearly 1 million cubic meters of stone came out of that hill, and nobody has ever found where it went. No spoil heaps, no discard mounds, no scar where you would dump that much debris. The stone left the hill and left no trace. Something enormous was planned, built, and finished, then erased so completely that the people living right on top of it grew up calling the entrances bottomless ponds. So, what were they for? Everybody wants this one closed, and nobody can. There are 4 serious theories, each with a point in its favor and a hole it cannot fill. Maybe quarries, dug purely to haul out stone, the chamber's just the empty space left behind. But the finish work fights that. The walls and pillars and ceilings far too carefully shaped for a place you only meant to gut for rock. Why smooth the inside of a hole you mean to abandon? Maybe ceremonial, temples, or ritual halls, and a few architectural touches, and those carved figures lean that way, though a lean is all it is. Or storage, since the caves stay cool and steady all year, except they also flood in heavy rain, a miserable trait for a warehouse, and nothing stored has ever been found inside. Or military, a shelter or hideout or staging ground. One Chinese researcher has even tied the caves to an ancient king who hid his soldiers underground after a crushing defeat. A great story, and like the rest, unproven. 4 theories, decades of argument, not one key that turns every lock, and people are still down there fighting about it. The real discovery. So, step back and look at what 30 years of exploring these caves like never before has delivered. Not a hidden city, not a lost race, not a tidy answer with a bow on it. Something better and far stranger. Hard measured proof that 2,000 years ago, people with hand chisels and torchlight carved 24 colossal chambers with such command of rock and weight and water that it still stands after 20 centuries. That is the stunning result the title promised, and it is no exotic secret in the dark. It is the moment a structural engineer stares at half-meter walls that refuse to fall and realizes the ancient builders were not crude at all. They were good. Science came with its lasers and models to explain these caves, and mostly it has confirmed how well the job was done, while still having no idea who did it or why. So, I'll hand the last piece to you. If the Longyou caves were yours to crack, what do you really think they were built for? A quarry, a sanctuary, a stronghold, or something nobody has thought of yet? Drop your theory in the comments, and if you want more real mysteries that science still hasn't put to bed, subscribe and stick with me. There are a lot more rooms left in the dark.